let's begin today's lecture. So today we're going to be talking about promises and closures. We'll first talk about promises. Have you guys seen this site, Latent Flip?
It's too bright.
Oh yeah, it is very bright. The stick. Oh, here it is. Better. Nice. Ooh. Have you guys seen this site before?
Yes.
Yes.
On Touch. Folders and also on GitLab.
Okay. Yeah. So can someone just quickly explain me what this is about, and when we press save and run here, this code will be run, and kind of what happens?
It's going to tell the callback how the which function is running first, call stack, and it's a visualization of the program.
Yes. Yes.
Nice way.
So first, what will happen is that when we call a function in JavaScript, that function will get added to the call stack. So the first thing we see is that this function here, the set timeout, will be added to the call stack. But JavaScript itself doesn't know, so this function is like, wait for 5 seconds and then call the console log that says, click the button. Let's say 2 has elapsed. Okay, so after 5 seconds, sorry, we'll call this function called where it logs 5 seconds has elapsed. But JavaScript itself cannot wait for 5 seconds. Because if we wait for 5 seconds on the call stack, then we are blocking for everything else. That means if the call stack is blocked, then we cannot type anything. We cannot run other functions. We cannot do anything. So it's like we just completely block the interface for the user, and that's a problem. So we don't want to do that. So the way JavaScript does it instead is it tells the browser, it says to it, hey, I have a timer. I have a function that I want to run after 5 seconds. So the call stack goes to the browser and says, hey browser, after 5 seconds, okay, call this function. And now, as far as the call stack is concerned, it's done with the function. It has called the set timeout function. So that means we can remove it from the call stack, and now the user can kind of use JavaScript in the browser again. And now it's the web API that kind of controls the function. So after the 5 seconds, the browser will go, hey, JavaScript, what do you want me to do now? You know, I've waited for 5 seconds, as you told me to. What do you want me to do now? And then we go, well, just call the function that I gave you, the callback function, which is this one. And how it works is that the callback function will get added to the callback queue. And if the call stack is empty, that function will get added to the call stack. So let's try and see how that looks. So now the browser kind of has taken care of the timeout, and when it's done, it'll add it to the callback queue, which will get added to the call stack. And then when we have the function on the call stack, we'll just run it as before. So that means after the 10 seconds, we'll say 10 seconds have elapsed. So that's kind of how some of the asynchronicity works in the browser. Because today we are going to be talking about promises. And first I'm going to write how it looks, and then you're probably gonna think, wow, this looks super weird, and then we'll kind of dive into what actually happens. So let's say we have a promise.
You can zoom in a bit more.
Yeah. Resolve. And set time out.
What module do you use? First and second, or
Week second, 8.
This is week 8. Yeah. Promise dot then mm-hmm. 2 seconds. Let's see. Okay. So let's not look at this to begin with. Let's just look at this. Okay, so this code, you know. Can someone just quickly explain what happens here with this code?
Basically, after 2 seconds of the timeout, you're gonna console log.
Yes. So the timeout, it takes 2 arguments, the set timeout function. One of them is a function, and the other one is the time in milliseconds that we want to wait. Okay? So here we have the function, that's the first argument, and the second argument is the time to wait. So after the 2 seconds that we have specified here, we run this function. And as we saw before, that is the browser that kind of takes care of all that waiting and what should it do with the callback, and it gets sent to the callback queue that gets added to the call stack. But now we want to introduce something called promises. So what is a promise? A promise is kind of another abstraction of working with asynchronous code. So up here, what happens is that we provide a callback function, and when the 2 seconds have elapsed, we call that callback function. With promises, it's a little different. With promises, we create a new promise. Okay, so that's this part here. We have a new promise that we can save into a variable, just like we can save a function into a variable, or we can save an array into a variable. So this you all know. We set a timeout, and after the 2 seconds, we call a function resolve. Okay.
I think you should watch what it says and then you write code.
Yes, I think that's a good.
What he tells you, and then you write code.
Good idea. Because this, I'll upload all of this to the Slack channel, so you will see that. Okay, so after the 2 seconds, we call a function called resolve. Okay. So when we create a promise, so the promise takes one thing as an argument, and what is that? Can someone tell me that? Exactly. It takes a function. Okay. That function in itself can take 2 things. Something called resolve and something called reject. We won't look into reject right now, only look into resolve. Okay? Resolve is also a function. Okay? So that means we can call it. Okay? So when we create a new promise, so what promise takes is a function. Okay? That can take 2 parameters. Resolve and reject. When we call resolve, okay, then this function is run, which is the .then function. So when we call this happens, okay? So it's like, call this, bam, it goes straight into here. Okay, so it's like we wait for 2 seconds, we call the resolve function, and then on the promise we can call a function called .then. The .then function, just like we did with map, like we did with reduce, with filter, it also takes a function. So you've seen this before, how we can just pass functions around. We do it up here. We give the promise, we give the data function, but also the promises.then function takes a function. Okay. So the .then function, it takes a function. So the function we give .then will get called when we call resolve. Okay. So let's try and look at that. So if we do up here resolve, okay, and down here we do .then. Okay, so these two should happen pretty much at the same time. It's maybe not like the exact same time, but they should come like bam bam. Okay, so let's have a look at that. Let's go into here, script loaded. So you saw that it said 2 seconds has elapsed, resolve and .then right after each other.
Actually, 2 seconds have elapsed. Which one is the one first? The down one, I think.
What, sorry?
There are 2 seconds has elapsed in a console log in two functions.
If we just come this out, so this is called first. We first come in here. If we did not have this code, then there's nothing we can call .then on, because we don't have a promise where we can call .then. Okay, so from the how it goes is like we create a promise, and after 2 seconds we get into this function, okay, that we've provided the set timeout. Then we call the string resolve, we log resolve out, then we call the function resolve from the promise. Okay, when we call the resolve, it'll go like, oh, that means I need to call the .then function. Okay, so let's try and do this a bit more kind of strict. So there are two sides of a promise. Okay, so it's kind of like this. We have the creation part, and the creation part looks like this: constant promise. Promise what? Oh, thank you very much. Constant promise 1. It's a great name. New promise. Yes. So what does promise take as an argument? A function. What does that function have as parameters? Exactly. Perfect. I'm so happy to hear that. Okay. Cool. We create a new promise. We give it a function. That function has 2 parameters: resolve and reject. Okay. When we have some asynchronous code, as for example the set timeout, so as the promise creator, okay, we need to kind of say when should something happen. Okay, and that's usually when some asynchronous code has run. So that means that could be after we have set a timeout. That could be after we have gotten some data from a server. It could be tons of different things. Okay, so it's like something asynchronous happens, and now we need to call the resolve function as the creators of the function. Okay, so when we have done this again as the creators, we are actually done. Now we can relax. Okay, because from the creation side, we have created a new promise. We have given it the function, where that function has the two parameters, resolve and reject. And most importantly, okay, we have called resolve when some asynchronous code has run, okay. Those are the responsibilities as the creators of the promises, okay. Now there's another side to this. This is the creation part. Now we also have a usage part, okay. That is when we want to use a promise. So maybe we got the promise not like here where we wrote the promise just above. Maybe we got it from some other class, or we called the function and that gave us a promise. Or, you know, we could get promises from all weird different ways, okay? But from the usage perspective, okay, we can call some functions, but the most important are the .then. Okay? Promise 1, .then. What does .then take? A function. Exactly. When is this function run? Exactly. Exactly. When we call resolve. Okay? So when we use the promises, we don't need to know anything about this. Okay? We don't care. The only thing we care about is that we can take the promise and we can give the .then a function, okay? And that will be run when some asynchronous code has been run. Okay, so maybe it makes a bit more sense if we call this set, or maybe wait 2 seconds. Okay, seconds promise. Okay, now it sounds a little better. Okay, wait 2 seconds promise .then. So what do you think happens? Like, when is .then called? Well, it's called after we have waited 2 seconds, right? It kind of looks nice. It's like, wait for 2 seconds and then run this function. Okay? Cool. So I'll show you later why this is really cool. But for right now, we just need to kind of learn how to work with them. Okay? So we have the resolve function, but we also have another function called reject. When do you guys think we need to call reject? What would be like your guess? When do we need to call that, do you think?
Fail.
Exactly. When something goes wrong. Okay? When something goes wrong, we want to call reject. Because in the word a promise, okay, it's like I promise to give you something. It's not like I might give you something. No, I actually promise you will get something. Okay? And then the problem is if I get some data from a server, right? And this server fails with the request. Maybe the internet went off. Well, now I have a problem as the creator of the promise, because I have promised to give the user of this function something, right? So when it fails, we call the reject function. Okay? Yeah, so now we won't get, normally you do it, we can show that later how you do that, but it's just like calling the resolve function. We just call it reject. And if we get down here in the code, we have called reject, and what? That's difficult to know. Catch is exactly.
No, we know it all.
Okay, so as the creators, we can call resolve and we can call reject. When we call resolve, things went right, we are happy, no problems. When we call reject, there was some kind of error. Okay? That is for the creation part. For the usage part, we can call two functions. One is the .then, That's the one where it's like, it just went so good, you know. After 2 seconds, everything was fine, and we call your .then function. We are happy, right? When we get into the .catch, that is when we call reject. Okay? So, resolve, the .then gets called. Reject, the .catch gets called. Because it's like we rejected, something went wrong, there was an error, there was some mistake, right? Then we go into the catch, and then we can get the error here. Okay. Now we are going to try and make another promise called bring me some pizza. And it's a promise. And it takes a function, and that function takes what? Yes. You sound so enthusiastic. I'm happy to hear it. Resolve, reject. But that's what I want to hear, because then you've said it over and over and over and over again, and it's not the last time you're gonna say that today. I can promise that. Okay.
Oh, that's a new promise.
That's a new promise. Yeah.
At the end of the time, it's all resolved.
Okay. How long does it take to make a pizza? It takes 10 seconds. Okay. After 10 seconds, we want to resolve with this bad boy. Oops. Okay, now as the creators of the promise, we are done now. Okay.
It needs to be in the codes, right? Because it should be a string.
What, sorry? No, I think you can do it like, or maybe, let's try.
Because you are putting a Unicode tag. Yeah.
I think you're right, yeah. Because otherwise it's a variable, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is not defined.
And you can't have emoticon as a variable in JavaScript.
No, are you sure?
No, you can't.
Try that. If that works, I'm gonna have from now on only variable.
I'm going to have a pure icon variables.
Let's see how this works. That would be kind of fun if that worked. Okay, so as the creators now, we are happy. We have created a new promise, and we have assigned it to a variable called bring me some pizza. We have called the resolve function after those 10 seconds, okay? Okay, now you help me with the usage part.
Then.
Yes. The then, and what does the then take? Yes. Okay, so let's first just say pizza has arrived. Okay, let's see how that works and see if it works at all. Let's see, 43.
Yeah, it's a goddamn pizza.
What did it say? Missing initializer.
Bro,
It does not even consider that as text.
Ah, I'm so sad.
Maybe in the future, guys.
But you can use this as
Pizza.
a string value. Yeah.
Oh, that would have been cool. Okay, script loaded. Then it's the 2 second thing. I'll comment that out in a second. And then after 10 seconds, we should see pizza has arrived. Okay.
Oh, you did not print the response from the.
No, I know. Boop, boop. Because you see what we did here. Let's not wait 10 seconds. Let's wait 2 seconds. We called the resolve function, but we actually gave it an argument, the resolve function. Where do you think we can get this argument?
In the argument of the function in them.
in the argument or the parameter?
What?
So here we give it as an argument. Where do we get that out?
Promise?
Then
Yes,
in the function that is taking them.
but not as the argument, but as a parameter.
It's a parameter.
Yes, exactly. Because here it's an argument, but here it's actually a parameter.
Yeah, so it,
When you define its parameter, when you call, then it's argument.
Yes. And here we create a new function.
that's right.
Yes. Cool. So now we can pass some data from the result to the .then, which is really handy. So let's try and do this. Data has arrived. Oh, this is exciting.
Oh,
Oh, I'm so.
No, so if you
that's the ingredients.
Oh, okay.
yeah. It is split it up.
if you put it
With your own pizza.
In the HTML, it
if you
works.
put it in HTML, it will work, but this console does not know how to deal with these new characters.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's like
come
Boo.
on.
I thought it was so clever. Anyway, we can use it in here, and that's cool enough for me. Okay, so now we've seen how to create a promise, and we've seen how to use it, and we've seen how we can pass data around from the creator of the promise to the user. Okay, here we send this data into this here. Okay, cool. Now I am going to show you a really cool kind of practical example of promises. Let's do the pan catch. This one, the title API. So we can do get movies, and there is a function called fetch.
You should make it a variable URL or something.
Yeah.
Movies URL equals like that. Okay, and let's try and just log it out and see what we get. What do you think we get when we log this out? Oh, and I have to say, fetch returns a promise. When we call the fetch function, it returns a promise. So let's try and just log that promise out and see how it looks. Okay, we have a promise here, and it says pending. What do you think the pending means?
waiting.
Yeah, it's in a pending state. It hasn't been resolved yet. At the time we log it out,
Yeah.
it's still in the pending state.
Is it like callback?
No, it's not like it's its own. It's like a function or an array. It's a totally new type, you could say. Yes. So now we have a promise here. Okay, we haven't created the promise here. Okay, some other people have created the promise. Now we just need to use it. But luckily you guys are experts in usage of promises. So what do we need to do here?
That,
Exactly. Dot then. And what do we give the dot then? Function. Exactly. And here we get some data. Yes. Let's try and log that out and see what that looks like. Okay, we get a type that is a response. Okay. We haven't really worked with responses before, and actually I haven't worked that much with it either, but it's kind of its own type. if you want to look up what you can do with it. Response. Here you can read a lot more about the response type, and it has some functions, it has some parameters we can set on it. But the one we want is this one, the .json. Okay? Because we know that the data we get here is JSON, and we want it so that it's an object we can work with in JavaScript. Okay? So let's try and say .json and see what do you think we will get here? Not JSON, but
Objects.
exactly. You would think that we get an object. Let's have a look.
No, it's a promise. You need to have that again.
Uh-oh.
What?
We get a new
It's a
promise.
promise for another promise.
Okay? So the .json function doesn't return the object, it returns
Next
another
time
promise.
you do dot then it will be there.
But luckily you guys are experts with usage of promises. So should we maybe call this, what do you think, what should we call this?
Movie list?
What, sorry?
Movie list? Movie list? Promise?
JSON
Yeah.
promise. JSON promise.
Movie list JSON promise. This is long, I know, but for the sake of it. What now? Yes. And
Movie list.
function?
Movie list. Now it should be movie list. Right?
Yes.
Finally.
Pancake, come on. Help me here. Yes, movie list.
Lock it out.
Knock that bad boy out. Let's have a look at it.
Surprise. Oh, finally.
We are happy, okay? But we didn't create any promises here, and that's why I'm saying when we get the promise, we can call the then or .reject on it. Okay, so I wanted to try and do like this.
Why did you say .reject?
What, sorry?
You said you can run then or .reject.
Catch. Sorry, catch. Yes.
I didn't notice you said that.
How can you do it?
No, I just like guilty about.
Error. Okay, how can we?
Yeah, change the
Yes,
URL.
URL.
Good idea. So we get an error here, and then it says here 68. Is that where we are? Yes. So it says type error, failed to fetch. Okay. So that's because when they did the fetch implementation, they have somewhere in that code, some code that checks, and then it runs the reject function, and then we can call that catch on that. Okay. So it works. Let's get this back. We actually, you probably know this, but we don't necessarily need to assign this to a variable. What can we do instead if we just want to work with the movie list?
Where we put that data.json brackets.
What, sorry? Yeah, exactly. We can chain it.
Yeah.
So we can do like this. And this is like a matter of preferences how you want to kind of indent this, but I just really like the look of this. I think it looks nice. Let's see, still working. We are happy. Okay. So now you have tried to create a promise, and you've tried to use a promise, or you know how to. So I have some exercises for you, as always. let's go into class 6. Upload. So, exercise 1. Only using promises. Okay, very important because that's what we're going to be learning today. Wait for 3 seconds. Okay, then fetch movies using this URL. Okay, and log the result out. When this is done, fetch the programmer humor posts. Okay. So here you have to create the promise. Okay. You have to do the new promise, and inside of that, set a timeout for 3 seconds. Okay. Here you don't have to create the promise. You can use the fetch to actually get the data out.
Question.
Yes.
Under what circumstance you would really manually create a promise?
Quite often-ish. I've done it lots of times.
But
Yeah.
like if you, but I mean like if you use fetch, it already creates its own promise. Why do you still need to like create?
That's a good.
For other use cases, like for example the set timer. There you could do the, or what, do you have any other good examples of creating of promises?
How about if you're getting data from 2 different places?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Because then you want all of those data before you continue working on it.
Yeah, so sometimes you do it, but it's a good point that if you use fetch, you don't need to. But you definitely need to know how to create a promise. Okay? So this use chaining instead, wait with that. We are only going to do A and B, and then we're going to return to this later. Okay?
Like it's about like last week's homework. I figured like many people have different results regarding the count of the matched movies with the dog who is not a man. So I wonder like who, like what, how, like what,
I
what
will
is the
share
right
some
one?
code like with and like video from the previous classes where we have done the homework and then the code we wrote. The issue is like we don't do